Welcome everyone. Today interview is with my guest who will introduce herself. And we're going to talk about early childhood education and in particular how to get qualified in Australia, or if you already have qualification, how to move to Australia and start teaching in early childhood. Over to you, Karen.
Hello, hi, my name is Karen McIntyre and I've got over 30 years experience teaching in early childhood. I'm currently teaching as an ECT in a community kinder and also a educational leader. And then I also work as a trainer and assessor, assessing Certificate 3 and diploma level students.
Mm-hmm. So it's vocational education and you
It
still
is.
maintain your currency as a teacher. That's amazing.
Absolutely, yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about background in early childhood? So when did you start? What inspired you to become an early childhood teacher? How did you get qualified?
Initially, I started quite a long time ago when I completed a diploma.
Mm-hmm.
That was in the UK. And I really got quite interested in Montessori. I did some of my placements in a Montessori kindergarten,
Mm-hmm.
and became very interested by the Montessori method. So decided to then go and take another diploma in a Montessori. When I
Oh.
completed that, I went to Munich in Germany, and I worked in quite a purist Montessori school for 3 to 6 year olds. And that was a beautiful experience where I got an understanding of purist Montessori. I really enjoyed consolidating my qualification. But after a couple of years, I wanted to branch out. I wanted to see early childhood outside Montessori as well, because I felt
Yeah.
in some ways it was wonderful and other ways it was quite restricted. So I went to Hanoi in Vietnam,
Oh,
and it was a challenge. But it was an amazing experience, and I helped to set up a school in Hanoi mostly for international people who were working a lot within charities and organizations that were Vietnam was just beginning to open up. So it was a very exciting time to go. And I had the 4 and 5 year old class. And that was a really challenging but really interesting journey that it's just explored a completely different culture and
Was
learning
it
to.
more structured and more Soviet style, communist like?
No, it was quite international,
Oh,
but
yeah.
we obviously had to learn to be incredibly resourcure. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't have big amount of resources, so we just make use of local resources. We were actually quite sustainable, even though that was 25 years ago, and we didn't really
Yep.
know a lot about sustainability then. We were actually quite sustainable because we used a lot of resources, and we had to wait for a big shipment to come in for our bigger resources from Singapore, and that could take 3 or 4 months. It was an amazing experience, and it taught me how to be resourceful and learned a lot about managing in some challenging environments as well.
Yeah,
So that
that's quite a
was,
different teaching curriculum as well, like in terms of teaching philosophies, teaching curricula in Vietnam and the UK. And then you moved to Australia or you worked somewhere else?
no, came back to the UK and
Mhm.
was head of a kindergarten in quite an affluent part of the UK in London, and I
Yeah.
managed kindergarten in 70-place kindergarten for 4 years and had a class of my own as well. So that was really
Mm.
interesting, and my first experience of management as well. So not just the
Yeah.
children, also managing the
Yeah.
teachers
Yeah.
as well. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
Then I moved out to Singapore, and I worked in an international school that was in the reception class in an international school in Singapore. Now that was quite
Mhm.
structured and quite a traditional approach.
Yep.
And then moved back to the UK, became the equivalent of in the UK of a family daycare. And when I had my own children, so I spent a couple of years doing that, and then moved into training. And I did also the equivalent of what we call authorised officer here for a couple of years, but
Oh,
a lot
wow.
of
I've done all of it. Yeah. So much experience.
it was really quite fascinating to see everything
Mhm.
from all sides. And then I did that for quite a number of years, and then came out here 10 years ago,
Yep.
and did a little bit of professional development through the Smith family,
Mhm.
first of all, delivering
Mhm.
professional development to the Smith family, Little Sciences Australia. really wanted to get back into a classroom. Then that's when my sort of journey started, with trying to get qualifications matched and going through that journey for getting transcripts for qualifications that I'd done 25 years ago. The qualification compatibility process is challenging and it's lengthy, and you do need to be incredibly prepared, and there are a massive amount of information that they will ask for, and try to compare the qualifications. My master's degree unfortunately wasn't recognised, so I then was told I could only work as a diploma level, and the only way that I could become
all
an
this
ECT,
experience.
yeah, it was quite frustrating. And so the only way I could become an ECT is if I took a fast track bachelor in Australia. So I did that in order to ensure that I was going to be able to qualify. Otherwise I would have to remain as an educator, which was fine, but I wanted to be an ECT. So that took a little bit of time. I would really recommend, if you were going to do that, is to make sure before you leave your home country that you make sure you get all your transcripts for all your qualifications in your home country before you come to Australia, purely because there's a time difference, and also it's easier to do it.
I agree with that. Did you do that through a CEQA or through Overseas Qualification Unit?
It was through a CEQA.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between English-speaking countries, and I'm coming from non-English-speaking countries. If your qualification is in English, it would go through a CEQA, but still a tedious process. While for me, it was first transcribe, right? So all the transcript, then translate, and it should be special apostle type of like translation. So it's an RT approved, and then apply for qualification matching. So in my case, I was a teacher of political and social science, which would be equivalent of university teacher, but they only accepted me as a teacher of political science without social science, and bachelor, not masters. Although I studied for 5 years, that was my journey. And this allowed me, with extra IELTS texts and exams and application for early childhood education degree, to do the same as you did, fast track of bachelor. It's quite interesting that with English-speaking countries and qualifications, we still have this issue of finding professionals like you, and then they say they don't have enough people, but that's exactly why, right?
Yeah, it was quite a frustrating process. I found it quite challenging.
Yeah, I guess the criticism is also about how people who pay for graduate diploma get fast tracked, but they might not have any previous background in early childhood. You clearly had experience that covers a lot of roles, and it was with early childhood age groups, right? Primary as well, but early childhood mainly. And
Absolutely.
I find this quite a barrier, and I think it would be good if ISEQA would address it as their future workforce development.
Definitely, yeah.
In terms of EYLF and the curriculum differences, so, and obviously teaching in early childhood requires you to know Victorian framework as well and Australian teaching standards. How did you find this transition? Was it hard? Yes.
It's very similar. The only difference is that obviously in the UK, children start school a year earlier.
Yeah.
So you have you have children starting school way too early, and some of them have only just turned 4, and they're expected to perform in a prep class when they're just not ready for it. So I found great relief when I came to Australia that children are given another year, and also you can repeat 4-year-old kinder. So if they need to, they have another year, and that option just is not available in the UK. They absolutely have to go. So you've got some children who are just 4, and if they've even got additional needs, there is no option to repeat kinder for another year if they're not ready. And that to me was an enormous positive about being in Australia, is it recognizing that social and emotional development, the need for children to just be allowed to grow. And I also feel as though there's a lot more focus on social and emotional development here. In the UK, it's very focused on academia. It's very
Yeah.
much from far too young.
So literacy, numeracy, reading, writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Most of the children I teach now are 5, and they would be expected to be reading. They would be expected to be sitting
Mm.
down, total control, and
Yeah.
just really far too much too soon.
Well, that's quite interesting because I have very different background, and my niece just started school, primary school. So that's her first year of school. She's 7. And that's quite typical. So I started school early. That was
Right.
6 years of age. And of course, I could read by this stage because I was learning to read slowly. And I could write probably a couple of things, but I didn't write a lot at this stage. They teach you during your first grade, which is called first grade, not prep, not preparation. And I think this system is very similar to Finland.
Okay.
And I was pretty much born on the border of Finland, so I found similarities as well. And they spend so much time spending time outside, play, physical
Mm.
development, that when you start school, sitting down is a little bit difficult because you are
Mhm.
adjusting. But there are breaks in between sessions. And first year, usually we have only 4 sessions a day, 4 lessons. And we come home at about 12, 1 o'clock. Yeah, start at about 9. So it's pretty good. I'd say on child's body. And then you go to after school curriculum activities if you do, usually dancing, drawing, music. And this pretty much is quite easy until the grade 4. And grade 4, you start biology, geography, all the other
Okay.
subjects. Yeah. But it's pretty easy going, I would say, yet academically inclined. But I see that she's pretty much ready for school, my niece. And I moved here, I found as a parent, because I wasn't a teacher, as a parent, I found that it's very early to start school at 5. But when I saw what they do at prep, I was relaxed because they do a lot of play still. Yes. In terms of looking at these aspects of our system, early childhood education system in Australia, what do you think our strengths, in addition to what you mentioned, for early childhood teachers and educators from professional point of view? Is it a good career?
Yeah, I think people are beginning to recognize that if you want good people and if you want people to remain in the profession,
Mhm.
you've got to respect them. And I think that's beginning to happen. The salaries, yeah, I think they do need looking at, and I can
Yeah,
that is now beginning to adjust. So I think people are now beginning to recognise and value a little bit more early
yeah,
education. I wish it would come away from being called childcare because it's a lot more than that. And I think we are just beginning to and
yeah.
hopefully begin to recognise the value that having some really good few years in early childhood will set children up for school and
Mhm.
will be so much more just set up a really solid foundation for the
Yeah.
children when they enter into school.
And since you have international experience as well and working in Montessori, which is quite different from play based, what do you think are some gaps that you observed in early childhood education and care in Australia? A lot of people state that, again, from different angles, usually parents from Asian descent, they talk about academic, and I guess UK parents as well. French people talk about academics that is lacking from kindergarten. Some people talk about care, and that's more like Eastern European and Russian parents and Ukrainians. They talk about routines that are not aligned with child's development stage. So they are babies, right? So they're young kids, toddlers, but they sleep on the floor. They eat sandwiches, they eat toast and like crackers, which is not appropriate for young bodies, and they think that the routines and environments are not suitable for young children, not hygienic enough, not good ventilation, etc. So I like to see these different approaches. So I guess they talk about values of communities as well. And because we have such multicultural society, how
Mm.
do you find it? in terms of care, education? What are the gaps?
Yeah, I think it depends on the kinder and the service. I still don't think there's enough professional development within early childhood, or is enough emphasis on it. The staff turnover
Yep.
sometimes is so high that has a real impact on just the security of the children.
Yep.
So yes, you can get, I think there's a lot of pressure from families to, particularly at this time of year for children in
Yep.
kindergarten, they've got to know their name, they've got to be able to write their name, know their numbers, and know their A to Z. And I think there's a real lack of understanding of what actually it's about building resilience. It's about that social and emotional development. And
Yep.
sometimes I think
Yep.
prep teachers need to be a little bit more in tune with why that is so important, rather than sticking a pen in their hands when they haven't got the pencil grasp. I think there is a little bit of, there needs to be some more work on the importance of social and emotional development, and also
Yep.
for some educators and also for families as well, just awareness of it and the reasons why we focus so much on that, and the reasons why writing your name, knowing your numbers 1 to 10 and reciting A to
Yep.
Z doesn't really set you up for school.
Yeah. So explaining readiness to parents and readiness to some educators as well, especially because we have such a multicultural workforce. I have been to, and like you probably, to Glen Beverley centers, a lot of centers in this area in the east of Melbourne, where you have a lot of teachers from Chinese background, teachers from Singapore, yeah, so like Korean teachers, and they bring their culture and these expectations into their classrooms. So the classrooms are covered in ABC numbers, which I like personally when it's part of play-based environment, and you
Yeah.
can do intentional teaching, but it still should be fun for children, especially if child is interested in numbers. I will teach this child to count to 1000 and back, but ordinary children in my group would learn probably to count to 20 and without pushing, right? So it would be part of us going outside, part of transitioning to the mat. But I noticed that they pay attention to displaying those posters and teaching in a way that you would teach in primary school. But even this is outdated now, right? We understand how brain works and children need to move. So you can teach numbers by drawing them in the air, by jumping, doing kinesthetic math, and just pretty much being aware that numeracy is not just about numbers, right? And I feel that this foundation of knowledge, of pedagogical knowledge, is a bit lacking sometimes when I visit a lot of centers and the teachers are not, I guess, experienced or have enough professional development and understanding the background importance of social emotional development, cognitive readiness for all these complex higher order functions. Yeah.
I do. And I think it's also, as you said, it's about an understanding that maths is more than just reciting numbers 1 to 10. And
Yeah.
just because you can recite them 1 to 10 doesn't mean to say you're going to recognize them in different contexts, in and out of sequence, linking up to the quantity, one-to-one correspondence. And it's the breadth of
Yeah.
understanding different concepts as well.
Mhm.
So yes, you've got explicit teaching that can come into it, but it's the way that you do it. It's got to be very
Yeah.
active, but it's also got to be the breadth of it. It's not just about, otherwise it becomes rote learning. And I think you see quite
Yeah.
a bit of that.
And as an educational leader, how do you ensure that your co-educators and colleagues understand that? What are the challenges there?
That can be challenging as well, particularly when you're working in such a small kindergarten way. The bulk of the time you are actually in a classroom yourself. So I've just organised to have some release time to support another educator who normally runs the sessions the same time as I do. I can just get into the room and to be a little bit more aware of what's happening. It is very tricky when you're working in community kinders. You have got very limited resources and you don't have an educational leader who's completely off the shop floor and being able to support. So it is about, I think, trying to find some release time, getting some people into PD, mentoring rather than saying you need to do this, with their strengths and then building on that
Mm.
by role modeling.
That's fabulous. I think this is coming with all the funding that we have, at least in Victoria. I was also going to ask you a question because you worked across different types of ownership, from family daycare to community-based kindergarten. There is a myth that family daycare is better than child-based or center-based care and education. And there is a myth that private centers are worse than community-based kindergartens. Even I still believe that community-based kindergartens and government-owned, like council-based centers, are showing better outcomes for families and children and high quality. Is that true from your experience?
No, I think it just varies, and it so much depends on the director, the people who are within the centre. I don't necessarily think there's better outcomes. I think
Yeah.
it very much depends on the individual. I do sometimes think that some of the private long daycare centres are very driven by numbers and
Yeah.
very driven by finances. Whereas in a community kinder, you tend to have people who are sometimes not as focused on and have to produce results, as in the documentation's got to look perfect, and they're more centered on the children and they're
Yeah.
allowed to be centered on the children. Whereas I think some of the big private providers tend to be very look good and look wonderful.
Mhm.
But again,
Yeah.
all this very much depends on the individual place. I don't necessarily think there's a set, just
Yeah.
because you're in long daycare, it's going to be
Yeah.
terrible. Just
Yeah.
because you're in kinder, because my experience sometimes with some community kinders, if you've got people who've been there 10, 20 years and haven't really moved their practice on, it depends on the individual.
I was also under the impression that private schools have more money to support their early childhood services. And I have visited one very famous school once, a few months ago. And I was so I love the resources, but I was surprised how they ordered lunches for children, and lunches were not healthy. This is inconsistency in what EYLF encourages us to do, and ISIQA through NQF talks about child health and safety and our proactive role. So it was almost like mac and cheese and hot dogs, food like that, which I was thinking is a bit weird. And when you visit a private center, I'm not going to name any so we don't flag them, that is part of a big chain, there is a chef that is cooking with children, and pretty much every day they have healthy meals. So if you look at this aspect of quality, sometimes even private schools, they have a lot of money, they for some reason do these practices that are not aligned with EYLF and NQS, while private centers, from my experience, feel a little bit busier than community-based centers, in a way that educators look flustered. That's my observation as an observer and a relief teacher. I am look flustered, tired, exhausted, a bit scared sometimes of their management, or that they have to tick boxes, a lot of documentation that is unnecessary. While in community-based centers, when I visit, I feel a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah.
So is it your experience as well?
Definitely. I think when centres are commercially run, then if there is, for example, an opportunity to have 33 children in the room, there will be 33 children in the room. Whereas private kinder, you may well have an option to have that amount, but often what will happen is they'll cap it at 22. And that just makes a mountain of difference. It's amazing. You can have, you can spend quality time with the children. So you are going to get someone who's less flustered. You are going to get an environment that's calmer. So it does make a massive difference when you put the quality before. I understand places have got to be viable, but it really can be, it can be. And again, what I think is you tend to get a very high turnover of staff.
Yeah. From what you said about your previous experience at Hanoi, I was making an observation that you also mentioned the quality is related to teachers, right? And educators. that means that the process quality, which means that early childhood educators and teachers are qualified, they maintain their currency, and they do undertake professional development, and they love their job and committed to children, and the teaching strategies that are aligned with research is what drives quality practices, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yep,
Yeah, and you
absolutely.
are saying it as a leader and as an expert in early childhood across different contexts. And the last question I thought we can cover is, what advice would you give to any early childhood educators and teachers who are considering to relocate to Australia to work?
Okay, first of all, I would never classify myself as an expert because I'm always learning, and it really is so important to do that. So, the one thing that I would do wherever you are in the world is always make sure that you do as much research as you can within the early
Mhm.
childhood environment. Make sure you've got all your transcripts and qualifications
Yep.
all ready and prepared prior to
Mhm.
coming. And really to have a look at for example, have a good look at the UILF, see how it aligns with the curriculum or the
Mhm.
guidelines you
Yep.
are used to. So you've just got a familiar idea. And then if you cannot get work when you get into a country, volunteer.
Yep. That's
Volunteer.
actually a perfect advice. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we will cover it again next time we have a chat. But thank you so much for your precious time, Karen, and thank you for sharing your experience with our community. Good luck to everyone who is trying to get a job as an early childhood teacher or educator, or get qualified, or just starting the journey. Yep. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. And
Thank
post
you.
any comments under this video, guys.
Thank you.